Hi, I'm Gary and welcome to my shop. In this video I'm going to show you how to make this MicroJig 360 sled. This is a really handy deal to use. Now this sled design is a great idea. It's very functional. I made it and a few tweaks to it. The MicroJig's video is about 4 minutes long and it shows you how to build this sled very quickly. Although in real time, I plan to spend a couple hours on it. The quick video is great if you're an experienced woodworker. I like to consider myself experienced, but even I struggle with a few things myself. In this video, I'll take a little longer and show you how I made a few tweaks to it and a few extras I made to make this even better. Now stick around to the end to learn a few useful tricks on this. Now, I had searched YouTube for videos on this and didn't find much more than MicroJigs out there. Then I came across one a few days ago by That Woodwork. Now he presents some more ideas too, and I'll put a link to that below. Now be sure to read the description below as it contains additional information, updates, and corrections. And check back often for updates. So let's get to it. Well, here I'm going to get ready to cut up this piece of plywood that I bought. And I bought this at Lowe's. It's a 3/4 inch thick piece of red oak plywood. It's got 10 plies to it, and I kind of debated on how I want to cut this and so forth, and I was thinking about the wood grain directions and so forth for best strength, but with all those plies that are oriented differently from each other, it's not going to make much of a difference anyway. But I got a piece that's it's a 2 by 4 foot, which will give me some more stuff to make some more jigs out of. And I go according to these directions for MicroJig. And the first thing I'm going to cut up is a 22 by 20 piece that I'll be working with. So I set up my fence here. So I've got this at 22 inches. And my first cut will be the 22 inch width. Then I'll turn that around, reposition my fence, and do the 20 inch width. So alright, for getting started out, as the instructions say in the directions here, I'm starting out with a 22 by 20 inch piece, and then my next cut is going to be cutting this down to a 16 inch width. So this piece will be my platform for making all the grooves and dados in it for the jigs, and the cut off piece here is going to be for making a fence and some other things. Here I will cut the 1/4 inch slot to give some clearance for the next cut, which will be with the dovetail bit, and I marked these up with 4 inches from the end of the fence to the center of the bit. And I'll cut one, I'll rotate it 90 degrees, cut another one, rotate it again 90 degrees until I get 4 cuts. That will give me 4 cuts across the bottom of this board. Then I will reset the fence to 8 inches from the center of the bit. Then I will get another 2 cuts out of this long length, and on the short length I'll just get 1 cut in the center, and that's all I need on that. I don't need to rotate and do that again because it could slightly off widen up that center cut too much. That gives me those 4 cuts. Next I will reset this to the 8 inches, get the center cuts across these. Okay, I've reset my fence here. Actually, I'm using a table saw fence here, as my router table fence doesn't go back far enough to give me an 8-inch cut. So I'm using my table saw fence here, and I'll cut this here and then a couple of cuts across this other way. Okay, I've got these relief cuts here cut. Now I'll go through and do the cuts with the dovetail. Okay, now I've put the dovetail bit in here. This one from MicroJig that cuts the slots as I need them. And what I'm going to do is do a test cut on a piece of scrap. Although this is kind of a narrow piece here to try and keep straight. Do the best I can and feed this through here. Get a test fit so I can test how well hold down jigs hold on to this and fit. So I'll try one of these, and it definitely fits in there, and this should do pretty good. I set it up based on the height of the setup jig here that they gave me, so that I've got, the correct height on that. So that seems to work pretty good. That holds great, and I think that'll do the trick. So now I'll cut out the rest of the slots on the board. Now I double check just to make sure that this is still lining up correctly with the slots I've already cut for the reliefs. So that looking pretty good. I can go ahead with this. Alright, I've got those 4 cut out. Now I'll reset it for the 8 inches to cut out these and the center one here. Okay, I've got my fence reset here for the 8-inch length from the fence. So I'll cut out the 2 in the middle here, and then the 1 in the center going the other directions. Okay, I've got all these cut out here. Clean it up a little bit, do a little bit of sanding, and be ready to go. Next step will be to install the parts for the miter slot rail. The next step here is to install this zero play guide bar. And this comes in 2 pieces, and we'll be attaching it together as it slides together to adjust and get wider in the miter slot to give it a good fit. Now both of these have an arrow. It's hard to see probably on here. It's got an arrow facing up on this one. This is the bottom part. It's got these 3 raised edges here, which will go into this part, which has 3 recessed edges. And this one also has an up arrow on it too, so you want both of these together with their up arrows going that way. Then put a couple of nickels in the slot here to kind of raise it up a bit so you can work with this. And you just take and get these a little bit tight, finger tight. And what we'll put in here is got these 3 black screws here that are socket head screws, and they go into these 3 screw holes here. You got 1, 2, and 3, and they're a recessed part in there so that the screw head will be below the surface of this. So we get these screwed in, and for the time you just get these in snug, not tight, leave it loose. Because we want this to be able to slide back and forth so we can get it adjusted to a good fit. So now we got those in there, it'll stay and hold, and we just hold one finger against this one end, another finger against this other end. You just push them together until they're snug. Push a little pressure on it here while you tighten down a screw. Kind of lock it in place. Want this to be good and snug, but not too tight or too loose. So get these snugged and check their fit. So that fits pretty good, slides pretty well, no slop side to side. So we can go ahead and tighten these down a little bit more. You don't have to muscle these down too much. A little bit finger tight is good enough. So now we've got that in there, and we're ready to next step to go onto the board here. We're going to set up and do our holes so we can locate the edge here against the blade. Alright, the next step here is to set up where we're going to make our holes in this board for attaching that zero play bar that goes in the miter slot. And we want to get it so it's close to the blade. Now the instructions, the way they have you do it is you measure this from your miter slot edge to the side of a tooth. Now I'm working with a blade that's a 3/16 blade instead of your typical 1/8 blade, and just want to get that so it's makes a little bit of noise. I look at my measurement and I see that I'm at 5 11/16 from the edge of the tooth to the edge of this miter slot. Now this is going to be what they call the long measurement. The next one is the short measurement, which is measuring the same way from this miter slot to the edge of a blade tooth. That's going to be the shorter measurement because it's closer to the blade. So put this on. Okay, so that's about like that. And I see my measurement there is 4 5/8 of an inch. So those are the measurements we'll work with, and what the instructions tell you to do then is to take your board. I'll switch this around here. You can see I've got a few plugs here because I made an error before. Actually following the instructions as they give it to me, but they set it up so that your blade or your board edge is about 1/8 of an inch away from the blade. I like mine to be right up to that for like a zero clearance effect. So I plug these. I'm going to redo them. I did redo them for this side here for doing on this side of the blade, on the left side of the blade to me, right side to you. So they want you to do is to take the measurement you got, like with that 5 11/16 plus a 1/4 inch. That would put me in at 5 15/16. That gets you basically 1/8 of an inch plus a 1/16 away from the blade, and actually it comes out to 1/8 of an inch away from the blade when it gets centered on your miter slot. So I don't want to have that gap. I'm actually going to increase my measurement by 1/8 of an inch instead of a 1/4 inch, which will give me, in my case, you have to measure this for your own table saw because these slots are going to be different for different table saws and different blade thicknesses. So the 5 11/16 plus 1/8 of an inch is going to give me 5 13/16. So that's just a 1/16 beyond 5 3/4. That's where I'll measure my distance for calculating where I'm going to put the holes for mounting that zero play clearance bar or miter bar. That'll determine my center on that. But actually I've got them all done over here, so what I'm going to do is go through the process of doing it for the right side. I want to be able to mount this on the left side and the right side both, because when I use the tilt on my table saw blade, it tilts to the left on me, the right to you. And if it does that, if the saw was here, or the table was here, it would cut into my surface here. Whereas if I have it on the other side, I tilt the blade that way, it's not going to cut into my surface at all. So that's what I want to do. So I'll get these marked up for where my centers are going to be based on the measurements from the right side, which will be 4 5/8 plus 1/8. Well, that would give me 6/8, or is that 3/4? Huh? Yes, 4 3/4 is the measurements I'll be making for centering the holes for this, for mounting the bar underneath here. Okay, so I've got that measurement set. What I'm going to do is make a mark about here. That'll be where my center's going to be. And that's still enough in there from the edge of this dovetail slot. I can still do that, because I'm only going to be drilling a 1/2 inch hole here. So then I'll do this here at this point and this point. Then I want to do, so I marked another hole, or another spot here, the 4 3/4 inches in from this end. I marked these from that edge to get that line, and then here, and then I have this from here. This is what gives me my center point right here. So next, I'm going to get a ruler, and from this center point that I marked here, I want to measure 4 inches all 4 different directions. That'll tell me where I'm going to put my holes at for mounting the zero play clearance bar. So I usually start out with like a 1 inch on the mark there, and go to 4 inches, mark that, erase a different mark I had before there. And from this one, I go from the 5 to the 1 inch. That gives me my 4 inches. Then, see, from 5 to 1 inch gives me 4 inches. 1 to 5 gives me my 4 inches. Now I have all my marks in here, and draw lines to make sure they're all straight. Try and identify them well here. There's, like one center, another center, this center, and a 4th center. Just kind of drawing some circles around them so I can make them easier to identify, and then I'll take my scratch awl and dimple these with my scratch awl to give my Forstner bit a starting point on the drill press. So, do those. Okay, and also I'll drill a 1/2 inch hole with the Forstner bit down to a depth of 9/16. I'll stop there. Dimple that's left over from the Forstner bit, then I'll drill that all the way through the board, through the end of it, with a 1/4 inch bit. And with these screws here, these are like a 10 by 32 screw. That'll give it some movement and slop so that we can get this perfectly lined up with the blade and squared to the table. So next I'll go to the drill press, get these drilled out. This will give me orientation for both directions here. That'll line up with this miter slot. Here at the drill press, I've got a 1/2 inch Forstner bit mounted up here, and I've got my depth stop set to 9/16 of an inch. 9/16 is just 1/16 of an inch past the 1/2 inch mark, so I've got that set so that I'll stop at that point so I don't go all the way through. And I'll do these 4 holes that way, and then I'll come back and drill the 1/4 inch hole. Okay, I'll line up for the next one. And now I'm set up to do the 1/4 inch drill bit through the center point of the holes there, where I did the Forstner bit, and then that will, find its center on the dimple left over from the Forstner bit, and then I'll just drill this all the way through. I've got a backer board underneath this here to try to minimize the tear out on the other side of this. Alright, so that gets me my holes drilled there. Next step is to go back and mount the 0-play miter guide bar on here. What I've done is taken this 0-play bar that I've set earlier, put a couple of nickels in here to raise it up a little bit, and I'm going to set this in here, those arrows pointing that direction, and then I've got 3 screw holes in here to mount these screws into. Look like about number 8. Pretty small. And what I'm going to do is, I've got my holes cut here. I'm going to set this on here and try get it all lined and get these screwed in. Stick the screw once I get the holes lined up and get them started in there. Get them a little bit snug, not real tight yet, because I'll have to make a little bit of wiggle room here to get these lined up and squared up with the table. Get this lined up with my blade. So it's tight against that. Then I'll tighten down these screws here. That'll get me fairly square and a good clearance. I'll turn on the blade and kind of trim that along a little bit. I'll remove these nickels here first. Make sure they don't get in the way. So I'm going to crank this up, slide this past, get it clear to a 0. I can see I need to have a little bit of gap at the end here, so I need to adjust this a little bit. So it's tighter against there. Always a little bit of tweaking to do. That's a lot better. Now what I can do when I want to change this over to go this direction, all I have to do is loosen up a couple of screws here, rotate this on the center of the screw, and rotate these down to these points here. I'll loosen up the center screw and rotate this bar around to these 2 screw holes here, then tighten those back down again and get them aligned to the blade. This makes it versatile, so I can use it on the right side of my saw blade. Then I put the bar over here. I use it on the left side of the saw blade. That'll give me some versatility. See, on here now I can tilt my blade. So as you can see, then I can get 45-degree or whatever cuts off this side of the board, whereas with this side it would cut into the board. So that'll work great, and whenever I want to go different directions, I just rotate my bar around to the other angles, and that'll have me set. Well, determining how to mount all those holes and so forth for the 0-play bar, get that all lined up and everything. I know it's kind of complicated and confusing, and there's a lot simpler way to do it too. Of course, the first thing we always consider is that you've got your blade aligned to your miter slots. so that they're all parallel and in line with each other. Then what I do for getting a zero clearance cut on my sled, I'll just take this up to the edge of my blade here. I'm going to always be using basically the same width blade. So if you're using a 1/8 inch or a 3/16 like I do, just kind of stick with that method as long as you've got the same blade all the time. Now, this method gets you a zero clearance cut, whereas following the methods of MicroJig gives you about a 1/8 inch gap between your sled and the saw blade. I like it zero clearance so that I get less tear out, minimal tear out. Anyways, so what I do is, this is a board I'm using as an example here. I kind of really cut it up. I want to show you how I line up and measure up my holes. And what I do is I just put this up against my saw blade here, get this lined up straight. Don't press it too much because, you know, things will flex a bit. So you just want to get it relatively flush up there. Then what I do is I mark approximate center here on where my miter slot is at. Then I'll do this other end also and get this marked up here. Then I'll take a straight edge that's long enough to span this board, and I just need to make a little bit of a line here to show the center of the miter slot is going to be a line beneath this board. Now I need to rotate this and get another angle here, and I'm going to mark here, same way again, center of that miter slot, center over here on this end. Take my straight edge, line it up on the marks. Where this other line is at, I'm going to draw another line there. And what this does is this gives me a center point right here. Now, to mark the holes, one hole is going to go here for the center point, and that's going to be the center screw on that zero play miter bar. Then each of the other two screws are exactly 4 inches on center apart from that. So then you would measure 4 inches with whatever rule you want to use. Let's see, I've got 18 here. So 18 minus 4 is going to be 14. And 18 plus 4 is going to be 22. So I'm going to line those up. Extend some of my lines here again. And then the same way with this direction. So we're going a 4 inch here. So that's 4 inches. 4 plus 4 is 8. So here will be my other holes to drill for mounting the zero play bar underneath that. That's a real quick and easy way of doing it. And then if you're doing this on the left side of the blade, you'll be doing it over in this part over here, and you would measure it up the same way, fitting this miter slot, because these two miter slots are located different distances from the blade. This miter slot's closer to the blade, this miter slot's farther away from the blade. So, but there's a quicker and easier way of doing it, and that gets you a zero clearance cut on your sled. Okay, when you finally get your zero play miter bar installed on the bottom side of your sled here, it may not align perfectly with your table saw top, and what you can do to line it up is just take a square like this and put it on this back edge of your table saw and pull your sled back, bring it up to the edge of your sled here. You can loosen your screws for the zero play bar and get this adjusted, and then tighten your screws back down again. Check your alignment again to know that you're lined up good with your tabletop. Then also to make sure you're lined up with your blade for your zero clearance cut, you can run this through and just shear off a little bit of the sled to make sure you got a good clearance on there, and that you're good and square. Also, Nice thing we can do is adjust this fence here and make sure we've got that square to the blade. This makes it really nice and easy to adjust. Just bring your carpenter square up here like this. Make sure you're not on a tooth or something. Hold it firmly against there. As you can see, you can adjust this around a little bit. Get it to a point where you're even on this edge here, because we don't want to be cutting through this too many times. Square with your blade there. Then you can tighten these down, and then you'll know that you're square with your blade with this fence. So you can get square cuts. That way you'll be square all over the place. So that helps a lot. Next step is showing you how I make this fence. I made this fence according to the instructions in MicroJig's setup. And I'll put a link down below on how to make this. It's really quick and simple to do. And one of the things I ran into though is how these knobs work on here. They really are restrictive here with your fingers, trying to, turn that. So it gets to be kind of a difficult issue, especially if you're trying to line this fence up and square it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some of these extended knobs here that I can put on, and this makes it a lot easier to work from above. So I'll show you how I do that. For making these knobs, I used a 3/4 inch dowel, and I set the dowel on the fence with a ruler and measured how long of a dowel to cut for this, and I decided on about a 2 1/4 inch. I wanted to make sure to get a height of these to clear the back side of the fence. The knob I'll put on will have a recess in it to insert and glue the dowel. So I wanted to make sure I still had enough clearance for the fence. I also need to take a look at how far the screw from the dovetail track screw will extend up into the dowel, so I make sure I drill a hole deep enough for that. Then on a sketch pad I drew up some shapes for handle wings. I thought of a 2-wing one, and I settled on a 4-wing knob. The overall diameter of the knobs is 1.5 inches. The inner diameter, which I will drill into the back sides of the knobs, will be a 3/4 inch to fit the dowels. The cutouts of the wings to form the knobs, I went with a 5/8 inch. Now these knobs are not perfectly shaped, but they work well for my shop needs. And I sanded up the rough edges and so forth, and they work pretty good for me. Now these diameters give me a good clearance on the fence and the ability to use my fat fingers on them. So in the next shots, I'll show you how I make and assemble these extended knobs for this fence. I drilled a small hole through the center of the 3/4 inch diameter that I'll attach the dowel at. That will serve to locate my Forstner bit on the back side. Now I flip the board over and I center my 3/4 inch Forstner bit on the small holes that I drilled out and cut that down to a 1/4 inch depth. Then using a 5/8 inch Forstner bit, I'll drill out the shapes to form the wings of the knobs. Then at the bandsaw, I'll cut out the outer perimeter of the knobs. Then back at the drill press again, I'll drill a 29/64 hole in the end of the dowel for putting the 1032 threaded insert into to about a 3/4 inch depth. Then on the other end of the dowel, I'll drill a 7/64 pilot hole for the screw that will hold the knob to the dowel. On the top end of the knob, I'll drill a 11/32 hole recessed into the centering hole to allow for a screw head to sit flush. Then some final sanding of the knobs and I'm done. Okay, here I'm going to mix up some epoxy and epoxy these threaded inserts into these holes on these dowels. Now to smear some epoxy into the inside of the holes here on these dowels. As its inserts thread in, it'll spread out the epoxy. A lot of times I would use a driver for driving these in was something like this with a screw and a double nut on there to lock it so I can drive those in. But with the fit that these are having, after much testing, I can easily do this with a screwdriver. Usually it's kind of precarious doing this with the screwdriver because these are brass inserts and they tend to be a bit soft and easy to break. So drive that in so it's flush. Yeah, that's good. I'll let those set up for, supposed to take about 20 or 30 minutes for this to set up. It's a 2-ton epoxy, but I'll give it a little couple hours, I suppose, to get that set up. Next step is I'm going to glue these handles that I made on this end, insert there, and then I'll drive these screws into that. Alright, so now I'm ready to glue these handles on to these dowels with the threaded inserts onto this end. I'll put a dab of glue on there, then drive the screw in to hold that in place. Okay, now the glue will set up, and in the meantime I've got a knob, extended knob. That I can use on this fence. And screw that on there. Tighten that down. And that'll give me a handle much higher up to use rather than way down below there where I can bang my knuckles against the back side of that fence. That'll work great. So we've got this MicroJig 360 sled done, and it gives us a lot of capabilities of things to do. Now you can make square cuts on this, lining up your board. Lining up with this, I've got it so I got a zero clearance cut, so that makes it easy to line this up for the cut that I want to make if I want to cut off a part of it. Also, you can do angles, just about any angle you want with this. And here's a piece where I marked up an angle that I wanted to do, and that's for this shop dust collector. And I wanted to make some supports for where I was going to attach it at over by my lathe, and I wanted to have the right angle to catch all the chips and dust flying off of that. So turned out to be an odd angle, something like 59 degrees I think. So I can do is line this up here along the edge there. It gives me a guide, and I can bring up this fence and line that up so I'm right on that mark. Then just tighten down these, make sure my fence is in enough so I won't cut off the edge of that when I pass through the saw. So that'll give me a perfect alignment. Also, if I want to secure it some more, I can bring up one of these Dovetail clamps, tighten that down. That'll hold it from moving or shifting. The fence will keep it from rotating, so it won't rotate on me. And I can just put that through, cut it off, what I need, build my jig. So works great. Now the MicroJig system allows you a lot of different kind of jigs you can use for a lot of different places, like at the bandsaw, at the drill press, at the router. Very useful at the table saw. You can make various things to go on your fence, and so you can hold pieces in place and everything. So really a great idea, and really a lot of functional uses to it. Now I just put it back here, use it like a regular cross-cut sled, line it up with my edges, and that should give me pretty much perfectly square, because the sled should be cut perfectly square as it is. But you can still check it out with a carpenter square, make sure you are square to the blade. That's what will be important. So here we go. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it and got some inspiration from it. If you did, Please give me a like and hit the thumbs up icon, and also share it with your family, friends, and fellow crafts and woodworking enthusiasts. Also, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so you won't miss anything new. And give us your comments. We'd like to know what you want to see, if you have any questions, and any suggestions that you have. We get a lot of great ideas from our viewers, and we appreciate that. Be sure to read the description below. There's a lot of information down there. Also, updates in the future. We'll post them in the description below. So, as they say on the Red Green Show, if the ladies don't find you handsome, at least they find you handy. Thank you.